new episode of A Decade Later, and this time I'm going to be looking at the third studio album from Arctic Monkeys, Humbug. Arctic Monkeys have been a massive part of UK music for well over a decade now. Every album has, been hugely successful for them. Not always with the critics, but they absolutely hit huge sales every time. They haven't really been big as like a singles artist for quite some time. They don't really make the charts in the same way they used to, with their first few albums having like #1 hits and pretty much every single hitting the top 10 at least. And although their sound has never been original, they certainly were a breath of fresh air for the time, I think, to just come through in the way they did. A rock band having that amount of success, pretty rare for the 2000s. It wasn't really a common thing. Obviously you had bands like Kings of Leon that did huge numbers too, but Arctic Monkeys managed to remain pretty consistent for quite some time with the greatness of the music they put out. I feel like that kind of went a bit short-lived for me personally. I feel as though every album since Favourite Worst Nightmare has underwhelmed me quite significantly, I've got to say. There have been a lot of great songs throughout those albums since then. AM is an album that a lot of people don't really like a lot, but it certainly has some highlights. And for me, I've got to say Humbug was the tipping point for that. Not particularly a bad album, not going to go as far as saying that, but it certainly underwhelms me in quite a lot of areas. This is the album where they started flirting with revivalism. They didn't fully embrace it until the album after this, On Suck It and See, but you can sort of see it starting to form in little pockets on this album where you can sort of see that Alex Turner's like, changing the tone of his voice a little bit. It's not completely like dress up time, let's just emulate a sound from an era, but you can sort of see it coming in, especially on the opening track, My Propeller. Just with his voice, it's very sultry. It just reminds me of an era of music that I just kind of feel doesn't need to be romanticized because we've already seen it done before, and it's just a real shame for me to see that this band, who were so energetic, so full of like sass, honestly. Alex Turner has so much sass on the first two albums, and on this album I feel like it kind of starts to fade away in favor of just standard ordinary rock tunes. The issue with this album is that it's not really an Arctic Monkeys album, it's just a pretty standard rock album from anybody. It's the lack of originality, I think, the fact that I'm just constantly thinking this sounds like it came from the 60s or 70s, as opposed to this is like a 2009 album from a band that started off their career so high with 2 amazing albums back to back. I'm just not getting that with Humbug. An issue that I think I found with this album for me personally is like the tone of the guitars throughout. They're very dark and dirty and quite like foggy for me. Like they don't really come out and shine in any particular way. There's no instantaneous melodies that you can grab straight away and think that's that song, oh that's that song. It kind of all blends together. I'm probably sounding like one of those annoying traditionalist people that, I only prefer their first few albums, because you know how annoying those fans can be, but I don't really, disregard the idea of Arctic Monkeys changing things up and doing something completely new and fresh, but they didn't really do that. They just kind of faded into the background of all other rock bands, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like they went and changed their sound up completely and experimented with something completely fresh and new. Their latest album, I think they did that the most with. But even then, they're still sounding like they're coming from an older time period. I think that's my issue. I think the moments they get it right, though, they really do get it right. I mean, Cornerstone is a fantastic song. I really do like Crying Lightning as well. Crying Lightning has so much passion behind it, and I think that's something that Alex Turner's always been able to sell really well. Even on some of their least interesting material, you get that from his vocals. He's absolutely selling everything he's saying. He believes everything he's saying. There's so much coming out of his voice. He's not the greatest singer you'll ever come across, but he doesn't need to be. I think one of his best traits, though, is that personality that shines through in his vocals when he really goes for it, and I just feel like that doesn't come up much on this album. It's obviously much worse on an album like Suck It and See, I've got to say, But on this album, it definitely feels like something's been taken away. I don't know if he's stripping things back, he's trying to sound a bit different, and it kind of feels like I'm just listening to any old guy in a pub doing some like rock revivalist songs. You know what I mean? I guess if you're in love with this album though, you're probably wondering why I'm saying these things, because you may not pick up any of these things, and to you it may just be, no, this is a great Arctic Monkeys album. But I feel like there is something missing, some kind of flair across most of these tracks. They're all performed very well. It's the exact same thing with AM. You know, all the performances on that album were great. All the performances on this album are great. But it's just the way the music ended up being presented. It's just kind of ordinary and stale at times. I don't think this album's bad though. That's the thing. Like when it's on in the background, I'm fine with it. It's okay to listen to. Like I say, most of the performances are fine. I would say the only issue I had with any of the tracks was the third track that came after Crying Lightning. Track Dangerous Animals, and this is a massive pet peeve of mine, and I don't know why, but I hate it when singers spell out words in songs. I hate it. I don't know why. It only really seems to ever work for like something like Aretha Franklin's Respect, where it's just so good to listen to and so fun. But any other time I hear it, I just don't want to hear it. It just sounds lazy as well coming from a band like this. I mean, I kind of feel like Alex Turner could definitely fill up that space with something so much more interesting than what he gave us on that track, and it's a real shame, to be honest. But yeah, I don't know if there's a great deal else for me to say. I think it's just a solid album that is honestly worse when you think of how good they started off. Like, maybe if this was their debut album, I wouldn't be so harsh on it, but when their debut album was so good, I feel like I've ended up being harsher on this album just by knowing that. And even the sophomore album, Favorite Worst Nightmare, like those two albums I just think are just great friggin' rock albums that no other band was really producing around the time. And then to go to this, to me, is quite a letdown, to be honest. I don't want to sound like I keep repeating myself here, but my biggest issue with this album for me is just how faceless it is. This to me could be anyone. And yes, Alex Turner has a trademark voice that you could recognize anywhere because of how, you know, so Sheffield it is. Like that accent breaks through so openly on almost every single one of their songs. But it's everything else for me. Everything else is just so standard. It's just so simple. They're just simple, straightforward rock songs that I wouldn't expect a band like this to be doing, to be honest. So early in their career as well. And the saddest part is, for me, I think they continue to get worse from here. Still some great songs throughout their career since the early 2010s, but they've been a pretty inessential part of music for the past 10 years, in my opinion. They've been very popular and remained very successful, but from the entire decade as a whole, they've been extremely inessential, and for me, I think Humbug was a starting point for that. One thing I'll say before I end off this review, though, is that it's kind of interesting to me that bands like Royal Blood kind of get slated by music critics for, you know, doing the same thing over and over again, bringing out a style of music that's been done so many times before, and it's been done so much better. But yet an album like Humbug has kind of just been given the pass from the same music critics that slate these kind of bands. Kind of weird to me, because I don't see what's different between this or any other rock band that's been hitting the mainstream for the past 10 years, honestly. And Arctic Monkeys were very influential on that style of music that has broke out in the UK, but they don't deserve a pass for me, because this is exactly that kind of style of music, I think. Overall, it's decent for what it is. Performances are good. It's a solid album. I'm gonna go 6 out of 10. I feel like I do want to go lower, but I think my mind is saying that I only want to go lower to like a 5 out of 10 because of the disappointment and the expectations I place on this album, if you know what I mean. I can't really go any harsher than that, because it is a solid release. It's a good album. Just isn't really it doesn't really appeal to my taste, I don't think. Let me know your thoughts on Humbug though. Let me know your thoughts on the best Arctic Monkeys album, and if you actually think no, they've stayed good throughout their whole career and I'm completely talking horse crap because you actually think every album they've put out is good, then let me know. But thank you for watching my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day, and goodbye. Crying like this.